My son and his wife went on a trip, leaving me to care for her mother, who was in a coma after an accident. As soon as they left, she opened her eyes and whispered something that made my spine freeze. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I never imagined that at 64 years old, I'd discover just how little I really knew about my own son. Grant had always been distant, even as a child, but I told myself that was just his personality. Some people aren't naturally affectionate, right? I convinced myself of that for years, especially after he married Amelie 3 years ago. When Grant called me last Tuesday morning, his voice carried that familiar tone of obligation rather than warmth. "Mom, Amelie and I need to take an emergency trip to Seattle. Her mother had another episode, and we can't leave her alone." Marianne had been in what the doctors called a vegetative state for 6 months now, ever since the car accident that left her with severe brain trauma. The poor woman just lay there in the hospital bed they'd set up in Grant's guest room, breathing through machines, completely unresponsive to the world around her. "Of course, sweetheart," I heard myself saying, though something in his tone made my stomach tighten. "How long will you be gone?" "Just 4 days, maybe 5. There was a pause. Then he added, "The nurse will come by twice a day to check her vitals and adjust her medications. You just need to be there in case of emergencies." I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why they couldn't hire a full-time caregiver if Marianne needed constant supervision. But I was so grateful that my son needed me for something, anything, that I ignored the warning bells in my head. Thursday morning, I arrived at Grant's house in Riverside with my small overnight bag. The house always felt cold to me, despite its expensive furnishings and perfect decorating. Amelie greeted me at the door with her usual practiced smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "Thank you so much for doing this, Laureen," she said, though her gratitude felt rehearsed. "Mother has been so peaceful lately. The doctors say she's stable, but we just can't risk leaving her alone." Grant appeared behind her, already checking his watch. "Our flight leaves in 3 hours. The nurse, Mrs. Patterson, will be here at 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. every day. Her medications are all labeled in the kitchen." I followed them to the guest room where Marianne lay motionless in the hospital bed. Machines beeped softly around her, monitoring her heart rate and oxygen levels. Her silver hair was neatly brushed, and someone had applied a light pink lipstick to her pale lips. She looked almost peaceful, like she was simply sleeping deeply. "She hasn't shown any signs of consciousness in months," Amelie whispered, standing beside the bed. "Sometimes I talk to her, hoping she can hear me, but the doctors say there's probably no awareness left." Something about the way she said it made me look at her more carefully. There was something cold in her expression as she stared down at her mother, something that didn't match the concern in her voice. Grant kissed my cheek quickly, a perfunctory gesture. "We'll call tonight to check in. Emergency numbers are on the refrigerator." And then they were gone, their designer luggage rolling across the marble foyer, the front door closing with a soft click that somehow sounded final. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the house settle around me. The silence was heavy, broken only by the steady beeping from Marianne's room. I walked back to check on her, adjusting the blanket that had shifted slightly when I leaned over to smooth her hair. That's when it happened. The moment my fingers touched her forehead, Marianne's eyes snapped open. I gasped, stumbling backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. Her blue eyes, clear and alert, locked onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. "Thank God," she whispered, her voice hoarse but unmistakably conscious. I was beginning to think they'd never leave. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Marianne, you're awake?" She struggled to sit up slightly, wincing as she did. "Help me, please. I've been lying still for so long my muscles are cramping." My hands shook as I helped adjust her pillows, my mind racing to process what was happening. But the doctor said, "Grant and Amelie said you were in a coma." Marianne's laugh was bitter, filled with a pain that went beyond physical discomfort. "Oh, my dear Laureen, there's so much you don't know." She gripped my hand with surprising strength. "They think I'm in a coma because that's what they want to believe. what they need everyone to believe. I don't understand, I whispered, sinking into the chair beside her bed. Marianne's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. They're drugging me, Laureen. Every day, sometimes twice a day, Amelie gives me injections that knock me unconscious. She tells everyone they're prescribed medications from my neurologist, but they're not. The room seemed to spin around me. That's impossible. Why would they do such a thing? Because, Marianne said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, they're stealing everything I own, and they need me unconscious so I can't stop them. I stared at her, my mouth dry, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. What do you mean stealing? Marianne closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. My bank accounts, my investments, my house in Portland. They've been forging my signature, claiming I gave them power of attorney while I was supposedly unconscious. They've already transferred over $200,000 out of my retirement fund. The numbers hit me like physical blows. $200,000. But Grant would never. He's my son. Your son, Marianne said gently but firmly, is not the man you think he is. And Amelie, her voice hardened. Amelie is a monster. I felt sick, my stomach churning with disbelief and growing horror. How do you know all this if they're keeping you unconscious? Because sometimes I fight off the drugs long enough to hear them talking. They think I'm completely out, so they don't bother to leave the room when they discuss their plans. Marianne's grip on my hand tightened. Last week, I heard Amelie on the phone with someone, laughing about how easy it's been to fool everyone. She said the hardest part was pretending to cry at the hospital. The room felt like it was closing in on me. This can't be real. This can't be happening. It gets worse, Marianne whispered, and something in her tone made ice form in my veins. They're not planning to keep this up forever. I heard them arguing about timing, about when to let me naturally slip away. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she was telling me. They want to kill you, I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. Marianne nodded slowly. And Laureen, I think you might be in danger too. The silence that followed Marianne's words was deafening. I sat frozen in that chair, staring at this woman I'd believed was unconscious, trying to make sense of what felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. What do you mean I might be in danger? My voice came out as barely a whisper. Marianne struggled to sit up straighter, and I instinctively moved to help her, though my hands were trembling. You're here as their witness, Laureen, the devoted grandmother, caring for her son's poor mother-in-law out of the goodness of her heart. When something happens to me, you'll be the one to testify that I never showed any signs of consciousness. The implications hit me like a sledgehammer. They're using me. They're using both of us. Marianne's voice carried decades of pain and betrayal. But you still have a chance to walk away from this. I don't. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The suburban street looked so normal, so peaceful. Children playing on lawns, neighbors walking their dogs. How could such evil exist in a world that looked so ordinary? Tell me everything, I said, turning back to her. From the beginning. Marianne took a shaky breath. The car accident was real. I was unconscious for about a week in the hospital, but when I started to wake up, when the doctors were talking about recovery and rehabilitation, Amelie convinced them I was having setbacks. She said I was agitated, confused, sometimes violent. Were you? No, but she was there for every medical consultation, playing the devoted daughter. She had them believing that moving me home for palliative care was the most compassionate option. Marianne's laugh was hollow. The doctors thought they were helping a family avoid prolonged suffering. I sank back into the chair, my legs too weak to support me. And Grant? Does he know what she's doing? Marianne's expression darkened. Oh, he knows. He's the one who suggested the forgery scheme. Amelie handles the medical manipulation, but Grant is the mastermind behind the financial fraud. The word fraud made my stomach lurch. My son, the boy I'd raised, sung lullabies to, worried about through every scraped knee and broken heart, was a criminal. How long has this been going on? The drugging started about 3 months ago. At first, it was just mild sedatives, supposedly to help with my agitation. But gradually, the doses got stronger. Some days I'd be unconscious for 18 hours straight. Marianne's voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if sharing the truth was giving her back her power. The financial transfers started right after they brought me home from the hospital. Small amounts at first, just a few thousand here and there, but once they realized how easy it was, they got greedy. How much have they stolen? As of last month, when I was conscious long enough to overhear a phone call, they'd moved nearly $400,000 from my various accounts. My house in Portland is up for sale, though I never signed any papers. They forged my signature using some legal loophole about incapacitated family members. $400,000. The number made me dizzy. I thought about Grant's expensive car, the renovations they'd done to this house, Amelie's designer clothes and jewelry. I'd assumed Grant's consulting business was doing well, but now, the nurse that comes twice a day, I said suddenly. Mrs. Patterson, is she part of this? Marianne shook her head. No, she's legitimate. But Amelie times the injections perfectly. She gives me the strongest dose about an hour before each nursing visit. Mrs. Patterson has never seen me anything but unconscious. What about the machines? The monitors? They're real, but they're not connected to any hospital system. They're just monitoring basic vital signs. As long as my heart is beating and I'm breathing, everything looks normal to anyone who doesn't know what to look for. I felt a chill run down my spine. You said they're planning to let you naturally slip away. What does that mean? Marianne was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was steady despite the tears in her eyes. I overheard them discussing it 2 weeks ago. Amelie was researching how to gradually increase dosages to cause respiratory failure. She found some medical forums discussing how certain drug combinations can cause what looks like natural complications in coma patients. The room felt like it was spinning. They're planning to murder you. Yes, and they're going to make it look like a tragic but expected outcome. The family did everything they could, but sometimes these things just happen. Marianne wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Amelie has already started talking to Mrs. Patterson about how my breathing has seemed more labored lately, how my color isn't quite right. She's laying the groundwork. I jumped up again, unable to sit still. We have to call the police. We have to stop this. With what proof? Marianne asked gently. It's my word against theirs. The medical records all support their story. The financial transfers were all done with forged signatures that look legitimate. And I'm supposed to be in a vegetative state. But you're conscious now. You can tell them what really happened. Can I? Or am I just a confused old woman with brain damage making wild accusations against her devoted family? Marianne's voice carried the weight of someone who'd thought through every possible scenario. Amelie has been very careful to establish a paper trail showing my supposed mental decline. She's even had me diagnosed with early-stage dementia based on behaviors she reported to doctors. The systematic nature of their deception was breathtaking. How long do you think we have? Based on what I overheard, they're planning to start the final phase when they get back from this trip. They wanted me to have a few days under the care of loving family before the tragic turn for the worse. Marianne looked at me with an expression that was somehow both desperate and determined. They needed a witness who could testify to my peaceful final days. That's where you come in. The weight of realization crashed over me. They asked me to come here not because they needed help. They needed an alibi. A perfect alibi. Grant's devoted mother, who loved his wife's family enough to sacrifice her own comfort to help care for an unconscious woman. Who better to vouch for their dedication and grief when I finally succumbed to my injuries? I felt nauseous. All those times Grant called me over the past few months, asking how I was doing, if I needed anything. I thought he was finally growing closer to me. He was keeping tabs on you, making sure you were stable, reliable, and completely unsuspecting. Marianne's voice was gentle but unflinching. I'm sorry, Laureen, but your son has been manipulating you just as much as he's been manipulating everyone else. The last piece of hope I'd been clinging to shattered. Grant didn't need me. He didn't love me. He was using me as an unwitting accomplice in murder. What are we going to do? I whispered. Marianne gripped my hand again, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination I hadn't expected. We're going to beat them at their own game. Over the next several hours, Marianne told me things that made my blood run cold. We spoke in whispers, even though we were alone, as if the walls themselves might betray our conversation to Grant and Amelie. The first time I realized something was wrong was about 4 months ago, Marianne began, her voice growing stronger as she shared her story. I was starting to feel more like myself after the accident. The physical therapy was helping, and I was beginning to remember things more clearly. That's when Amelie started suggesting to the doctors that I was having episodes. What kind of episodes? According to her, I would become violent when she tried to help me with basic tasks. She said I didn't recognize her, that I would scream and try to hit her. She even showed up to one doctor's appointment with scratches on her arms. Marianne's voice was filled with disgust. Scratches she gave herself. I felt sick imagining the performance Amélie must have put on. And the doctors believed her? Why wouldn't they? She was the devoted daughter, exhausted from caring for a traumatized mother. She would cry during the appointments, talking about how heartbreaking it was to see me so confused and angry. She even brought Grant to one visit to confirm her stories. What did Grant say? Marianne's expression hardened. He played his part perfectly. Talked about how difficult it was for Amelie, how worried he was about her mental health from the stress of caring for me. He suggested that perhaps medication could help calm my aggression so that Amelie could provide better care. The calculated nature of their deception was stunning. So the doctors prescribed sedatives. At first, yes, mild ones. But Amelie kept reporting that they weren't working. She said I was getting worse, more violent, more confused. Each visit, she painted a picture of a woman descending further into madness. Marianne paused, closing her eyes as if the memory was painful. The doctors started prescribing stronger medications, and that's when Amelie began preparing her own injections. What do you mean? She would show the doctors the prescription bottles, let them see that she was following their instructions, but she was also adding her own concoctions. Drugs she was somehow getting elsewhere. Marianne's voice dropped. I think she has connections from her previous job. Previous job? She used to work at a rehabilitation facility for elderly patients. She was fired about 5 years ago, though Grant never told me why. I found out later from a mutual friend that there had been some kind of investigation involving patient medications, but nothing was ever proven. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture so dark I could barely comprehend it. She's done this before. I think so. And I think that's how she and Grant met. Not at the coffee shop like they told everyone, but through some connection related to her work with vulnerable elderly patients. Marianne shifted uncomfortably in the bed. Grant has always been drawn to easy money, even as a teenager. Remember when he got in trouble for selling fake IDs in high school? I did remember, though I'd tried to forget. Grant had been suspended for 2 weeks, and I'd spent hours at the school principal's office, making excuses for his behavior. I thought he'd outgrown that phase. He didn't outgrow anything. He just got better at hiding it. Marianne's voice was filled with a sadness that went beyond her own situation. Laureen, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about money for them. They enjoy it. The control, the deception, the power they have over someone helpless. What do you mean? Sometimes, when they think I'm completely unconscious, they talk to me anyway. Amelie will lean over my bed and whisper things about how pathetic I am, how no one will miss me when I'm gone. Grant talks about all the things they'll buy with my money, the trips they'll take. Marianne's voice trembled slightly. They've turned my suffering into entertainment. I felt rage building in my chest, hot and fierce. Those monsters. Last week, when they thought I was deeply sedated, I heard them discussing timeline. They want to wrap this up before the holidays because they've already booked a cruise to the Mediterranean. They're using my money to pay for it, and they want me dead so they can enjoy it without worry. A cruise? The casual nature of it, the way they were planning to celebrate her murder, made me feel physically ill. $15,000 for a month-long luxury cruise. They've already put down a deposit. Marianne looked directly at me. They're planning to be grieving family members who need time to heal from their tragic loss. The audacity was breathtaking. How do you know all these details? Because they're not as careful as they think they are. When you believe someone is unconscious, you stop monitoring how loudly you speak. And when you're excited about your schemes, you tend to share details. Marianne managed a weak smile. They've essentially confessed their entire plan to me over the past few months. What exactly is the plan? Marianne took a deep breath, as if preparing herself to relive the most terrifying parts. Starting when they return from Seattle, Amelie is going to begin documenting what she calls concerning changes in my condition. She'll call Mrs. Patterson and maybe even bring in another nurse for a second opinion. She's going to report that my breathing seems labored, that my color is off, that she's noticed signs of organ failure. But you're fine. Not for long. She's going to increase the drug dosages to actually cause the symptoms she's reporting. Respiratory depression, irregular heartbeat, signs that my body is shutting down. Marianne's voice was clinical, as if she were discussing someone else's death. The beauty of their plan is that it will look completely natural. A brain-injured woman whose body finally gives up the fight. How long do they think this will take? Based on what I overheard, they're planning for it to happen over about 10 days. Long enough to seem natural, but not so long that it becomes inconvenient. Marianne paused. They want me dead before Thanksgiving. That was less than 3 weeks away. And what about after? What happens when you're dead? They inherit everything through Amelie's status as my next of kin. The house, the remaining money, my life insurance policy. They've already researched probate laws to make sure there won't be any complications. Marianne's voice grew cold. They've even picked out my burial plot. The cheapest one they could find, of course. No point in wasting money on a dead woman. I was shaking with rage and horror. We have to stop them. We have to find a way to prove what they're doing. I've been thinking about that for months, Marianne said. The problem is that everything they've done has been very carefully planned. The medical records, the financial documents, even the witnesses who can testify to my supposed condition. It all supports their story. But we know the truth now. We know the truth, but proving it is another matter entirely. Marianne looked at me with an expression that was both desperate and determined. That's why I need your help, Laureen. You're the only person who's seen me conscious. You're the only one who knows what they're really doing. What do you want me to do? Marianne was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was stronger than it had been all day. I want you to help me gather evidence, real evidence, the kind that even the best lawyers can't explain away. How? They think they're so clever, but they've made one crucial mistake. Marianne's eyes had a fierce gleam. They trust you completely. Grant believes his sweet, naive mother would never suspect anything. He thinks you're the perfect witness because you're too innocent to see what's really happening. So we use that. Exactly. Over the next few days before they return, I need you to help me find proof of what they've been doing. Bank records, medication bottles, anything that shows the truth about their scheme. Marianne gripped my hand tightly. And when they come back and start the final phase of their plan, we'll be ready for them. What if they suspect something? What if they realize you're conscious? Marianne smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw hope in her expression. Then we'll give them the performance of their lives. We'll let them think they're winning right up until the moment we destroy them. The determination in her voice sent chills down my spine, but they weren't chills of fear anymore. They were chills of anticipation. For the first time in my life, I was going to fight back against the people who had used and manipulated me, and we were going to win. The next 2 days passed in a blur of careful investigation. Marianne and I worked together like detectives, gathering evidence whenever Mrs. Patterson wasn't scheduled to visit. We had to be incredibly careful about timing. Marianne would pretend to be unconscious during the nurse's visits, and I would play the role of the concerned caregiver, asking appropriate questions about her condition. Mrs. Patterson was a kind woman in her 50s who genuinely cared about her patients. Watching her check Marianne's vital signs and adjust her blankets with such gentle professionalism made me realize how thoroughly Grant and Amelie had deceived everyone involved. Her breathing seems steady today, Mrs. Patterson noted during her Friday morning visit, making notes on her chart. How has she been overnight? Very peaceful, I replied, hating how easily the lies came now. No changes that I've noticed. After she left, Marianne and I immediately got back to work. She directed me to places in the house where Grant and Amelie had hidden evidence of their crimes. Check the filing cabinet in Grant's office, Marianne whispered. Top drawer behind the tax documents. That's where they keep the forged papers. I found what she was talking about. Copies of power of attorney documents, medical directives, and bank authorizations, all bearing Marianne's signature. But when I compared them to her real signature on some old Christmas cards, the differences were obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. They practiced, Marianne explained when I showed her what I'd found. I caught Amelie tracing my signature on practice sheets months ago. When I asked her about it, she said she was helping me with thank you notes for get well cards. I believed her. We also found records of the illegal drug purchases. Amelie had been ordering sedatives through online pharmacies, using fake prescriptions and multiple identities. The shipping records were all there, hidden in a box in their bedroom closet. She's been getting them delivered to different addresses, I told Marianne, as I photographed the evidence with my phone. Post office boxes, neighbors' houses when they're out of town, even some to your old address in Portland. How much has she spent on this? I added up the receipts. Over $3,000 in the past 4 months. All paid for with transfers from your bank account. The irony was sickening. They were using Marianne's own money to buy the drugs they planned to kill her with. But our most disturbing discovery came when I found Amelie's journal. She keeps a diary? Marianne asked when I told her what I'd found hidden behind books in their bedroom. Not exactly a diary, more like planning notes. I felt sick reading it. She's been documenting everything. The drug combinations, the timing, even her observations about how you react to different dosages. Marianne was quiet for a long moment. Read me some of it. I opened the journal to a random page and read, October 15th, increased morning dose to 4 milliliters. Subject remained unconscious for 19 hours. Breathing remained stable, but heart rate dropped to 58 beats per minute. Need to adjust to avoid suspicious readings during nurse visits. She's treating me like a lab experiment, Marianne said, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to another page. October 22nd. Subject showed signs of awareness around hour 16. Made soft sounds when repositioned. Administered additional dose immediately. Note, may need to increase standard dosage to prevent breakthrough consciousness. My God, Marianne. She's been studying how to keep you unconscious more effectively. What else does it say? I flipped through more pages, each entry more chilling than the last. October 28th. Discussed timeline with G. Agreed to begin final phase after Seattle trip. Will document declining condition starting November 1st. Estimate 10 to 12 days for complete respiratory failure. G excited about December cruise. Suggested upgrading to suite with our windfall. Marianne closed her eyes, but not before I saw tears forming. They're talking about my death like it's a vacation planning meeting. The final entry was the worst. November 2nd, L will be perfect witness to final days. Her testimony about peaceful final weeks will be crucial for any insurance investigations. G says his mother has always been easy to manipulate. She'll never suspect anything. Looking forward to finishing this and moving on with our lives. I set the journal down, my hands shaking with rage. She calls you the subject and me L like we're not even human beings. Because to them we're not. We're just obstacles to overcome and tools to use. Marianne opened her eyes, and I was surprised to see determination rather than despair. Did you photograph all of it? Every page. Good. Now we need to put everything back exactly where we found it. We can't let them know we've discovered their plans. We spent the rest of Friday carefully replacing all the evidence, making sure everything was positioned exactly as we'd found it. Marianne coached me on how to act natural when Grant and Amelie returned. Remember, you've been caring for an unconscious woman for 3 days. You should seem tired, maybe a little overwhelmed. Ask them lots of questions about my condition and what to watch for. Act like the concerned, slightly anxious mother-in-law. Saturday morning, Mrs. Patterson made her usual visit. As she checked Marianne's vitals, she made a comment that sent chills down my spine. "Has anyone else been giving her additional medications?" she asked, studying her charts. "Her heart rate seems a bit slower than usual." My mouth went dry. "Just what's on the schedule you gave me." Mrs. Patterson frowned slightly. Well, these things can fluctuate. I'll make a note for her primary care physician." She looked at me with concern. "How are you holding up, dear? This can't be easy." "I'm managing," I said, though inside I was screaming. She was seeing the effects of Amelie's drugs without realizing what they really were. After she left, Marianne and I discussed what the nurse's observations might mean. "They've been dosing you even when they're not here," I realized. "There must be some kind of delayed release system." "Check the IV bag," Marianne suggested. "Amelie changes it every day before the nurse visits, but she might have added something to this one before they left." I examined the IV setup and found what looked like a small additional chamber attached to the main line, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. "That's it," Marianne said when I described it to her. "She's been giving me extended doses through the IV. That's why I've been having trouble staying conscious for longer periods. Should I remove it?" "No. If Mrs. Patterson notices a change in my vitals before Grant and Amelie return, it might raise questions we're not ready to answer yet." We were running out of time to prepare. Grant had texted that morning to say their flight was delayed, but they'd be home by Sunday evening. That gave us less than 36 hours to finalize our plan. "What exactly are we going to do when they get back?" I asked. "We're going to let them start their final phase exactly as planned," Marianne said. "But this time we'll be recording everything." Sunday afternoon, my phone rang. Grant's name appeared on the screen, and my heart started pounding. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, forcing my voice to sound normal. "Mom, change of plans. Our flight got moved up. We'll be home in about 3 hours instead of tonight." My blood turned to ice. We weren't ready. "Oh, that's wonderful. I know you're anxious to get back to check on Marianne." "How has she been?" "The same. Mrs. Patterson says her vitals are stable. She seems very peaceful." The lies felt like ash in my mouth. "Good. Listen, Mom, I want to prepare you for something." The nurse mentioned that Marianne's condition might start declining soon. These things happen with brain injuries. Sometimes patients seem stable for months, then take a sudden turn for the worse. He was already laying the groundwork, just as Marianne had predicted. "Oh no. What should I watch for?" "Changes in her breathing, her color, things like that. But don't worry, Amelie will know what to do when we get back." "Of course. I'll see you soon." After I hung up, I ran to tell Marianne about the change in plans. 3 hours, she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "That's enough time to set up the recording equipment and get everything ready." "Recording equipment?" Marianne smiled. "Did you think I've been lying here helpless for months without making any preparations? There's a box hidden in the basement behind the water heater. Bring it up here." When I found the box, I was amazed at what was inside. A small digital recording device, a tiny camera, and what looked like professional surveillance equipment. "Where did you get all this?" "I ordered it online months ago, when I first realized what they were planning. It took weeks of pretending to be unconscious while packages were delivered, but I managed to hide everything before they found it." Marianne's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "They think they're so clever, but I've been preparing to destroy them for months." As we quickly set up the hidden camera and recording devices, I felt a mixture of terror and excitement. In just a few hours, Grant and Amelie would walk through that front door, believing they were about to complete their perfect crime. Instead, they were walking into a trap that would expose them for the monsters they really were. "Are you ready for this?" Marianne asked as we heard a car pulling into the driveway. I looked at this brave woman who had endured months of abuse and manipulation, who was about to risk her life to bring her tormentors to justice. "I'm ready." The front door opened, and I heard Amelie's voice calling out cheerfully, "We're home!" The final phase was about to begin. "Lorene, we're back." Amelie's voice carried that same artificial sweetness I'd grown to recognize as a warning sign. I heard their footsteps in the hallway, the rolling of suitcase wheels across the marble floor. Marianne squeezed my hand once, then immediately went limp, her eyes closing as she slipped back into her performance. The transformation was so complete, so convincing, that for a moment I almost believed she really was unconscious. "How is she?" Grant asked as he appeared in the doorway. His face showed what looked like genuine concern, but now I could see the calculation behind his expression. "Very peaceful," I said, standing up from the chair beside Marianne's bed. "Mrs. Patterson was here this morning. She said her vitals were stable, but mentioned that her heart rate seemed a little slower than usual." I watched Amelie's face carefully as I said this. There was a flicker of something, satisfaction, before she arranged her features into an expression of worry. "Oh dear," she murmured, moving to Marianne's bedside. "Sometimes that can be a sign of changes in her condition." She placed her hand on Marianne's forehead with theatrical tenderness. "Poor mother. She's been fighting so hard for so long." Grant moved to stand beside his wife, and for a moment they looked like a devoted couple concerned about their loved one. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been moved by their apparent grief. "The nurse mentioned that we should watch for any changes," I said carefully. "What exactly should I be looking for?" "Well," Amelie said, still stroking Marianne's hair with fake affection, "with brain injuries like mother's, sometimes patients can take sudden turns for the worse. Their breathing might become labored, their color might change. It's all part of the natural progression of her condition." The way she said natural progression made my skin crawl. She was already preparing the narrative for Marianne's murder. "Is there anything we can do to help her?" I asked, playing my part as the concerned but naive mother-in-law. Grant and Amelie exchanged a look that lasted just a fraction too long. "We just have to keep her comfortable," Grant said. "Make sure she's not in any pain. The medications help with that," Amelie added. "I'll need to adjust her dosages based on how she's been responding while we were gone." I felt my pulse quicken. This was it. They were about to begin the final phase of their plan. Should I stay to help? I could take time off work. "That's so thoughtful of you, Mom," Grant said, and for a split second I almost believed the warmth in his voice was real. "But you've already done so much. You should go home and get some rest." "Actually," Amelie interrupted, her voice taking on a sharper edge, "maybe Laureen should stay tonight, just to make sure everything goes smoothly as we transition back to our normal routine." Grant looked at her with surprise. This wasn't part of their original plan. "Amelie, I think Mom has done enough." "No, I insist." Amelie's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Family should be together during difficult times." Something in her tone sent alarm bells ringing in my head. This wasn't about wanting my help. This was about control. "Of course I'll stay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Whatever you need." Over the next few hours, I watched them settle back into their routine with mounting horror. Amelie checked and rechecked Marianne's medications, making careful notes about dosages and timing. Grant spent time on his laptop, and I caught glimpses of what looked like travel websites and bank statements. During dinner, takeout Chinese food eaten mostly in silence, Grant's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled in a way that made my stomach turn. "Good news?" Amelie asked. "The cruise line confirmed our upgrade. Penthouse suite with a private balcony." He looked at me and added casually, "We're taking a long vacation after the holidays. We've been under so much stress with Marianne's condition." "That sounds wonderful," I managed to say. "You both deserve a break." The casual way they discussed their murder vacation while sitting just yards away from their intended victim was breathtaking in its cruelty. Later that evening, as we sat in the living room, Amelie began what sounded like a rehearsed conversation. "Laureen, I want you to know how much it means to us that you've been so involved in Mother's care," she said. "It shows what kind of person you are." "She's always been dependable," Grant added, reaching over to pat my hand. "Even when I was growing up, Mom was always there when we needed her." The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. I had been there when he needed me, to provide alibis for his crimes. "I just want to help," I said softly. You have helped. More than you know. Emily's voice dropped to a more serious tone. But I need to prepare you for what might happen over the next few days. The doctors have warned us that Mother's condition could deteriorate quickly. What do you mean? Grant leaned forward, his expression grave. Sometimes with brain injuries, patients seem stable for months, then suddenly take a turn. Their body systems start failing one by one. It's heartbreaking, Emily added, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. But it's also a blessing in a way. Mother won't suffer much longer. They were so convincing, so practiced in their deception. If I hadn't heard Marianne's story, if I hadn't seen the evidence of their crimes, I would have believed every word. Is there anything I can do to help during this difficult time? I asked. Just be here, Grant said. Having family around makes it easier to cope. Emily nodded. And if anything happens, if Mother takes a sudden turn, we'll need you to help us understand that we did everything we could. There it was. The real reason they wanted me to stay. They needed their witness present for the final act. Around 10 o'clock, Emily announced it was time to give Marianne her evening medications. This might be a good learning experience for you, Laureen, she said as we walked to Marianne's room, in case you ever need to help with her care again. I watched in horrified fascination as Emily prepared the injection. She was so casual about it, chatting about the different medications and their purposes while she drew liquid from multiple vials into the syringe. This one is for pain management, she explained, holding up one vial. This is to help with muscle spasms, and this one helps her sleep peacefully. The peaceful sleep medication, I realized, was probably the sedative that would keep Marianne unconscious for the next 18 hours. As Emily administered the injection, I had to fight the urge to stop her, but we needed them to reveal more of their plan, and Marianne had insisted she could handle whatever they gave her for one more night. How long before it takes effect? I asked. Usually within 15 minutes she'll be deeply asleep, Emily said, disposing of the needle in a medical waste container. She won't wake up until late tomorrow morning. Grant appeared in the doorway. Everything okay in here? Just fine. Mother should rest comfortably now. Emily smoothed Marianne's blanket with mock tenderness. Sweet dreams, Mother. As we left the room, I felt sick knowing that Marianne was already fighting off the drugs coursing through her system, but I also felt a surge of admiration for her strength and determination. Back in the living room, Grant poured himself a scotch while Emily made tea. The atmosphere felt almost celebratory, though they were trying to hide it. I'm exhausted, Emily announced after finishing her tea. I think I'll turn in early. Laureen, the guest room is all set up for you. Actually, Grant said, setting down his glass with more force than necessary, I think we need to have a conversation first. Something in his tone made both Emily and me look at him sharply. He was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, almost predatory. Grant? I said uncertainly. He walked to the window and pulled the curtains closed, then turned back to face me. Mom, I need you to understand something about the situation here. Emily moved to stand beside him, and suddenly they looked less like a grieving couple and more like a team preparing for battle. What situation? I asked, though my heart was already pounding with dread. The situation with Marianne's condition, Grant said slowly, and your role in what's going to happen over the next few days. I don't understand. Grant and Emily exchanged another look, and this time I saw something pass between them that made my blood run cold. Mom, Grant said, his voice taking on a tone I remembered from his teenage years when he was about to lie his way out of trouble. Marianne is going to die this week, and you're going to help us make sure no one asks any uncomfortable questions about it. The words hit me like physical blows. Even though I'd known this was their plan, hearing Grant say it so casually, so matter-of-factly, made it real in a way that terrified me. Grant? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Mom. It doesn't suit you. His voice was hardening now, losing all pretense of warmth. You've been here for 3 days. You've seen Marianne's condition. When she dies, and she will die very soon, you're going to tell everyone that she went peacefully, surrounded by family who loved her. You're scaring me, I whispered, which wasn't entirely an act. Emily stepped forward, her mask of sweetness completely gone now. You should be scared, Laureen, because you have a choice to make. You can be part of this family, or you can be a problem that needs to be solved. What kind of choice? Grant sat down across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Here's what's going to happen, Mom. Over the next few days, Marianne's condition is going to deteriorate. Her breathing will become labored, her heart rate will become irregular, and eventually her body will give up the fight. And you're going to be here to witness all of it, Emily added. You're going to see how hard we fight to save her, how devastated we are when we lose her. When the paramedics come, when the police ask routine questions, when the insurance investigators follow up, you're going to tell them exactly what you saw, Grant continued. A loving family doing everything possible for a brain-injured woman who tragically lost her battle. I stared at them, these two people who were calmly explaining how they planned to commit murder and use me as their alibi. And if I don't? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mom, Grant said softly, you're 64 years old. You live alone. You don't have much family besides me. Accidents happen to elderly people all the time. The threat was clear, even though he'd wrapped it in gentle language. I felt true fear for the first time since this nightmare began. You wouldn't, I breathed. We really hope we won't have to, Emily said, her voice bright and cheerful again. We much prefer having you as our ally rather than our enemy. After all, family should stick together. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what they'd just told me. They weren't just planning to murder Marianne. They were prepared to kill me too if I didn't cooperate with their scheme. I need some time to think, I finally managed to say. Of course you do, Grant said, standing up and walking over to pat my shoulder. The gesture felt like a snake wrapping around my neck. Take all the time you need, but remember, Mom, we start tomorrow morning, and we need to know that you're with us. As I walked to the guest room on shaking legs, I heard them whispering in the living room behind me. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably that of predators discussing their prey. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, my whole body trembling. They had just threatened my life as casually as they might discuss the weather. And tomorrow, they were going to begin murdering Marianne while forcing me to watch and later lie about what I'd witnessed. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly suspect, was that every word of their confession had just been recorded by the hidden devices Marianne and I had planted throughout the house. The trap had been sprung, and they had walked right into it. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the house made me jump, wondering if Grant and Emily had decided I was too much of a risk to keep alive until morning. But as dawn broke through the guest room window, I was still breathing, still alive, and still determined to see their plan through to its conclusion. At 6 a.m., I heard movement in the hallway. Emily was starting her morning routine, checking on Marianne and preparing what she would claim were prescribed medications. I lay still, listening to her soft footsteps and quiet humming, amazed at how normal she could sound while preparing to commit murder. Around 7, Grant knocked softly on my door. Mom, are you awake? I opened the door to find him standing there with a cup of coffee and what looked like genuine concern on his face. The performance was so convincing that for just a moment I almost forgot what he really was. I brought you coffee, he said gently. I know last night was a lot to process. Thank you, I said, accepting the cup with hands that only trembled slightly. Have you thought about what we discussed? I looked into his eyes, my son's eyes, and saw absolutely no trace of the boy I'd raised. Yes. And? I understand what you need from me. The words tasted like poison in my mouth. Grant's face relaxed into what might have been relief. I knew you'd see reason, Mom. Family has to stick together, especially during difficult times. Of course, I said softly. I just want to help. Good. Emily is going to start documenting changes in Marianne's condition today. She might need you to witness some of those changes to confirm what you've observed. I understand. Grant patted my shoulder again, that gesture that now made my skin crawl. You're doing the right thing, Mom. This is what's best for everyone. After he left, I got dressed quickly and made my way to Marianne's room. Amelie was there, adjusting IV lines and making notes on a chart. "How is she this morning?" I asked. "I'm concerned," Amelie said, her voice full of practiced worry. "Her breathing seems more labored than usual, and her color is off. I think we might be seeing the beginning of the decline the doctors warned us about." I looked at Marianne, lying motionless in the hospital bed. Her breathing did seem slightly more labored, but I knew that was due to whatever drugs Amelie had given her the night before. "Should we call Mrs. Patterson?" "I already did. She's coming by this afternoon to reassess." Amelie made another note on her chart. "I also called Dr. Brennan's office to let him know about the changes." Dr. Brennan was Marianne's supposed neurologist, another part of their carefully constructed web of lies. I wondered if he even existed, or if Amelie was managing that deception too. What can I do to help? Just keep watch over her while I prepare her morning medications. If you notice any changes in her breathing or color, let me know immediately. I sat beside Marianne's bed, gently holding her hand. To anyone watching, I looked like a caring family member providing comfort. But I was actually checking for the subtle signs we'd arranged, a slight pressure of her fingers to let me know she was conscious and alert inside her chemically induced prison. The pressure came, barely perceptible, but definitely there. Marianne was awake, aware, and ready. Over the next few hours, Amelie orchestrated what could only be called a masterpiece of deception. She documented declining vital signs, noted changes in Marianne's breathing patterns, and called in concerned reports to medical professionals who existed only in her imagination. "I'm worried about fluid in her lungs," she told someone on the phone, supposedly Dr. Brennan's nurse. "Yes, I know it's a common complication with prolonged bed rest. Should we increase the respiratory therapy?" Grant played his part perfectly too, acting like a devoted son-in-law struggling with the impending loss of his wife's mother. He made tearful phone calls to imaginary relatives, updating them on Marianne's deteriorating condition. "I think we should prepare ourselves," he told me around lunchtime. "Amelie thinks it might happen within the next 24 to 48 hours. "So soon?" I managed to gasp, playing my role as the shocked family member. "These things can progress very quickly once they start," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand, "but at least she won't suffer much longer." Mrs. Patterson arrived as scheduled at 2 p.m. I watched nervously as she examined Marianne, wondering if she would notice anything suspicious about the supposed deterioration. "Her oxygen saturation is lower than I'd like to see," she said, frowning at her equipment, "and her heart rate is more irregular. These can be signs of organ stress." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I already knew she was observing the effects of Amelie's drugs. "It could mean her body is starting to shut down," Mrs. Patterson said gently. "I'll need to call Dr. Brennan and see if he wants to adjust her care plan." After she left, Amelie seemed pleased with how the visit had gone. "See how it works?" she said to me quietly. "The nurse is documenting everything. When this is over, there will be a clear medical trail showing natural progression of her condition." That evening, as we sat down for what I knew would be our last family dinner, Grant opened a bottle of wine to celebrate what he called getting through a difficult day. "To family," he said, raising his glass. "To family," Amelie echoed. "To family," I repeated, though the word felt hollow in my mouth. As we ate, they continued to discuss their plans with the casual cruelty I'd come to expect. The cruise, the house they wanted to buy with Marianne's money, the new car Amelie had picked out. "We're thinking of moving to Florida after everything settles down," Grant said. "Fresh start, you know. Too many sad memories here." "What about me?" I asked, playing into their assumption that I would be part of their ongoing deception. Grant and Amelie exchanged one of their looks. "We were hoping you might come visit us often," Amelie said sweetly. "Maybe even relocate eventually. Family should stay close, especially after going through something traumatic together." They wanted to keep me close where they could monitor me, make sure I never decided to tell the truth about what I'd witnessed. That sounds wonderful. I said, smiling at them both. Around 9 p.m., Amelie announced it was time for Marianne's evening medications. "This might be the last dose we give her," she said quietly. "I'm going to increase the respiratory suppressants. If her body is already struggling, this should ease her transition." Transition, such a gentle word for murder. I followed them to Marianne's room and watched as Amelie prepared what I knew was a lethal cocktail of drugs. She was more careful this time, measuring precise amounts and making detailed notes about dosages. "This is a merciful thing we're doing," she said as she drew the mixture into a syringe. "She's already gone, really. We're just helping her body catch up to what her mind already knows." Grant nodded solemnly. It's what she would have wanted. As Amelie moved toward Marianne's IV line with the syringe, I felt my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. This was the moment we'd been waiting for, the final proof of their intent to commit murder. "Wait," I said suddenly. They both turned to look at me, Amelie's hand frozen halfway to the IV port. "I want to say goodbye first," I said, moving to Marianne's bedside. In case she doesn't wake up." "Of course," Grant said softly. "Take your time, Mom." I leaned over Marianne, pretending to whisper final words of comfort, but what I actually whispered was, "Now." Marianne's eyes snapped open. The effect was electric. Amelie screamed and dropped the syringe, its contents spilling across the floor. Grant stumbled backward, his face turning white with shock. "Hello, Amelie," Marianne said, her voice clear and strong as she sat up in bed. "Surprised to see me awake?" For a moment, no one moved. The three of us stared at Marianne as if she had risen from the dead, which in a way she had. That's impossible," Amelie stammered. "You've been unconscious for months. Your brain damaged. You can't what? Can't think? Can't remember? Can't plan?" Marianne swung her legs over the side of the bed with surprising grace. "Oh, my dear Amelie, I remember everything. Every injection, every forged signature, every dollar you stole." Grant found his voice. "This is impossible. You're having some kind of episode. You're confused. Am I?" Marianne reached over to the bedside table and picked up a small recording device. "Then perhaps you can explain this." She pressed play, and suddenly the room filled with their own voices from the previous evening. "Marianne is going to die this week, and you're going to help us make sure no one asks any uncomfortable questions about it." Grant's face went from white to gray. Amelie looked like she might faint. "Keep listening," Marianne said calmly. The recording continued. "Over the next few days, Marianne's condition is going to deteriorate. Her breathing will become labored, her heart rate will become irregular, and eventually her body will give up the fight." "You recorded us," Amelie whispered. "For months," Marianne confirmed. "Every confession, every plan, every casual discussion about my murder. Did you really think I would just lie there helplessly while you destroyed my life?" Grant lunged toward her, but Marianne held up her hand. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. You see, those recordings are already in the hands of the police, the FBI, and the district attorney's office. They've been watching this house since yesterday afternoon." As if summoned by her words, we heard the sound of car doors slamming outside, followed by heavy footsteps on the front porch. "Police! Open up!" Amelie collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands. Grant stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "You see," Marianne continued conversationally as the front door burst open and armed officers flooded into the house. "I've been working with federal investigators for months. Healthcare fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit murder. You two have been very busy criminals." The officers appeared in the doorway, weapons drawn. "Nobody move! Hands where we can see them!" Grant and Amelie were handcuffed and read their rights while I watched in amazement. The nightmare was finally over. As they were led away, Grant looked back at me with something like betrayal in his eyes. "Mom, how could you do this to your own son?" I stared at him, this stranger who had never really been my child, and felt nothing but relief. "You're not my son," I said quietly. "My son died a long time ago. You're just a criminal who happens to share my DNA." After the police left with their prisoners, Marianne and I sat in the quiet kitchen, drinking tea and processing what had just happened. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. "From the moment I realized what they were doing. I contacted the FBI through a lawyer friend, and we've been building the case ever since." Marianne smiled. "They needed evidence of intent to commit murder. Your presence here as their intended witness was the final piece we needed. What happens now?" "Now they go to prison for a very long time. Healthcare fraud alone carries a 20-year sentence. Add in the elder abuse, the theft, the conspiracy to commit murder." Marianne shrugged. "They'll be old before they see freedom again." "And the money they stole?" "Already recovered and returned to my accounts. The FBI had been tracking every transaction." Marianne reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Lorene, I can never thank you enough. Without your help, they would have gotten away with it." I thought about that, about how close they had come to the perfect crime. If I hadn't been there to witness Marianne's awakening, if I hadn't been brave enough to help her gather evidence, Grant and Amelie would be planning their cruise vacation while Marianne lay in a grave. "What will you do now?" I asked. "Live," Marianne said simply. "For the first time in months, I can actually live without fear. And you?" I considered the question. At 64, I was starting completely over. No son, no family obligations, no one to please or worry about except myself. "I think I might travel," I said, surprising myself with the words. "I've always wanted to see Ireland." Marianne's eyes lit up. "I've always wanted to see Ireland too. Perhaps we could go together." The idea sent a warm feeling through my chest, the first genuinely happy emotion I'd felt in months. I'd like that very much. 6 months later, Marianne and I stood on the cliffs of Moher, watching the Atlantic Ocean crash against the rocks below. The wind whipped our hair around our faces, and we laughed like schoolgirls as we struggled to take selfies with the dramatic coastline behind us. Grant and Amelie had both been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The trial had been a media sensation, with headlines about the son and daughter-in-law who tried to murder an elderly woman for her inheritance. I'd testified at their sentencing hearing, looking both of them in the eye as I described the terror and betrayal I'd felt when they threatened my life. Neither of them had shown any remorse. Even facing decades in prison, they maintained they were the victims of an elaborate setup. But justice had been served, and more importantly, Marianne and I had found something neither of us expected: friendship, freedom, and a second chance at happiness. As we walked back toward our rental car, Marianne linked her arm through mine. "Where to next?" she asked. I smiled, feeling lighter and more alive than I had in years. Anywhere we want. And for the first time in my life, that was exactly true. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.